governments shut down businesses to make, these are safe decisions that they're making, but like they've had a massive impact on people. And so our membership has been incredibly hit, and really, I think I tend to say our membership has been laid off, but we continue to fight. So we've had a pretty big response. They kind of fall into a couple of categories. Our union health funds extended healthcare benefits for workers basically of up to 7 months to make sure that they had healthcare when there was no money coming in to pay for it. Some employers obviously did more, but for the most parts, the union's healthcare plans continued providing healthcare benefits. We worked tirelessly on legislation that falls into the categories of continuing to push for unemployment benefits, recall protections in other areas, particularly local and state authorities, massive efforts to sign up 290,000 workers on unemployment benefits to make sure that they were in the line to start getting those benefits. And you can see the pictures here. These are of Local 7, and Birdie's in one of them, doing a massive food drive for our membership in Baltimore. And that's taken place in Orlando and LA and all across the country as we've been raising funds to continue providing food distribution to laid off hospitality workers. While our membership was laid off, we did not take it just lying down. We were laid off, but not knocked out, is what we say. While we had 290,000 people laid off, we engaged in what was in 2020 the largest door-to-door canvassing operation of any union. We actually had over 2,000 of our laid off members travel to Georgia and Florida, Arizona, Nevada to door knock to make sure that we could actually get people to cast their mail ballots, to get them to the polls, to register voters, to cure ballots in Georgia, and to deliver a Democratic majority to make sure that we had people in office who would continue providing aid and assistance to thousands and thousands of laid off workers. The photo you see here is of, Hilton hotel workers from Baltimore who were all, that hotel was basically all closed down and all laid off, that traveled to Georgia to deliver the Senate and make sure that there were 2 more Democratic votes in the Senate. So these are housekeepers who were laid off and went to Georgia to change the country. And then just a little bit about what has happened with many of our employers, what union hospitality workers have done. So this looks at university cafeterias, hotels, event centers, casinos, et cetera. And what we've been able to accomplish with those union employers, we got most of our union employers to extend recall rights. So people that have been laid off that are just looking to come back to their job of between 2 and 3 years. Many employers have continued to pay healthcare benefits of up to 6 months for laid off workers, some longer. I'll highlight Google and Facebook that have paid 100% of their workers' wages and benefits for the last 13 months. So those 6,000 cafeteria workers have been paid all of their wages and benefits while we wait to see what happens with COVID. Other employers have done the same thing, like Pfizer and Goldman Sachs and many other large. Hopkins has paid all of the benefits for that period of time. Many employers have stepped up with providing additional sick days or quarantine pay if people can't work because a spouse had COVID or they have COVID or they came in contact with somebody with COVID, and not wanting to spread it in the workplace. Higher safety standards. Some employers have bargained hazard pay, like the Baltimore Convention Center, which has been turned into a hospital and a mass vaccination site. Our members who work there feeding the healthcare providers have been receiving hazard pay. And many employers have bargained with us for what we call a safe right to recall. And what that means is, as they start reopening the businesses, lots of people are in high risk factors. Our membership tend to be, we have a lot of membership that have health conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, et cetera, that shouldn't be back in an unsafe workplace. And so they've bargained with us to allow those high risk individuals or people with childcare issues who can't, whose kids don't go back to school, to be able to stay at home and collect unemployment rather than have to return to work. So, union hospitality employers, for the most part, have started to step up. Now, that's not true everywhere, and it's definitely not true of the non-union world. The non-union hotel industry, particularly, has fought increased safety standards, virtually eliminated daily hotel room cleaning. So whereas it used to be that your hotel room got cleaned every day, they've taken this as an opportunity to have less cleaning of hotel rooms, laid off workers in mass in March without providing healthcare benefits or wages during that time period, and lobbied strenuously against the right of workers to be recalled to their jobs when COVID is over, wanting to use this as an opportunity to gut their own workforce. In Baltimore, we actually passed an ordinance that would have allowed for unlimited recall of laid off hotel workers. The industry lobbied against it, and the mayor actually vetoed the bill that would have just allowed workers to return to their long-term jobs when the COVID ended. We took this up with the Catholic Labor Network and with many other community groups and with politicians, and we're actually able to override the mayor's veto earlier this year. And so thousands of hospitality workers in Baltimore won the right to a recall through our lobbying efforts and our organizing efforts. And it's a really great thing. One of the major industries that's not covered by this, Baltimore right to recall bill or by the union agreements we have with hospitality employers is the airports. And so I wanted to dig a little bit into what the airport industry looks like today. The airline industry is probably the hardest hit of all the industries. This is a graph that I made showing the impact of COVID on what are called emplanements. So these are the percentage of people that are flying this year versus last year. So if you notice in this graph, there's a top left-hand corner, it says 100%. What that is, in March 1st of this year, how many people were flying March 1st of 2020 versus March 1st of 2019. Then you see this massive dip. And what that shows is where things were around April 15th of 2020 versus April 15th of 2019. And you will see that 96.5% decrease in people on flights in the course of about a month. 96.5% decrease. At one point, there were more flight attendants flying in the US than people flying in the US. That's how bad the employment numbers got. And what that meant for about 20,000 airline catering workers and 30,000 airport concession workers were massive layoffs, unlike anywhere else. And you can see the charts, this as it shows a gradual return, that even today, essentially 1 year later, we are looking at 65% reduction in employments on a daily basis, meaning for the people that serve the food, make the drinks, cook the food, put food on the planes, just massively less work, less hours, less benefits, less jobs, huge downturn. BWI is no different than anywhere else. Right now, they are down 62% from where they were at the comparable point last year. And the industry is looking at a long recovery, longer than anywhere else. At Thurgood Marshall Airport, we see decreased employment as roughly 85% of hospitality workers continue to be laid off today. Changed jobs and companies increasing the use of automation, virtually eliminating cashiering, some types of bartending, et cetera. The real increase in automation and pushing out low-wage workers. The industry is predicting a 4-year downturn as it ramps from what it is today to hopefully getting back to where it was. And unlike many other airports, Philadelphia has passed a policy mandating recall. Atlanta has, has passed a policy mandating recall. LA, San Francisco, many other airports are members at BWI. There is no real right to recall. The non-membership, the non-union workers, there are also no real right to recall. What we will see is literally thousands of hospitality workers at that airport be permanently unemployed beginning next month. So what we're doing about it, just like we passed an ordinance in Baltimore City and in Philadelphia and Atlanta and San Francisco and other cities as well, like Providence and Washington, D.C. and Oakland. We are moving a bill in Maryland called HB 1012 that would apply to all airport hospitality workers, whether they're union or non-union, making sure that they are laid off in seniority order, but also called back for whenever the industry recovers. The industry is saying it needs a massive bailout from the federal government because of this 4-year economic downturn, but they're not saying that the workers will receive any of that or get their jobs back when they recover. And so we're making sure that for as long as these layoffs take place, workers will have a right to return to their jobs, including even if businesses change hands. We know these companies change frequently. Right now, a similar bill is moving in Minnesota, covering the whole state. The Minnesota Catholic Conference is supportive of that bill and lobbying on behalf of it, viewing it as kind of a no-brainer justice issue that workers should be protected in the middle of this worldwide pandemic. And so we really do believe that our church should support this in the Maryland session. We want individual parish social justice committees to work with us and to have those individual Catholics contact state delegates and senators. I'm going to pass it over to Bertie now to talk a little bit about kind of the next steps and what the local is doing, as well as to answer any kind of questions, since she's obviously much closer to the impacted workers. Bertie?
Thank you so much, Chuck. Before I start, I just want to say thank you and put a little heart here for you guys, everybody who supported us at the Marriott waterfront. Just as an update, the workers were finally able to ratify and finalize their contract just 2 weeks ago. And so it was a long time coming. COVID got in the way a little bit, but we were definitely able to get that contract finalized. So thank you so much for all of your help. So again, for the folks who came on a little later, my name is Alberta Palmer. I'm a lead organizer with Unite Here Local 7. I've been with the organization for about 8 years now. I'm also the organizer for the workers at BWI Airport, where we represent about 150 workers out of just over 1,000 workers at that airport. So the folks who are covered under the collective bargaining agreement in our union, they do have recall rights extended to them for about a year. They have other pandemic protections, but of course, that does not affect the majority of the workers at the airport. That leaves about 850 workers just like, out there, right? And like Chuck mentioned before, we were able to get recall and retention rights passed in the city of Baltimore. And it really was tremendous help to union and non-union workers alike. We were also able to help them in various other ways, like, find and accessing resources that was, used to help them and their families throughout the pandemic. We were able, in some cases, to help people find other jobs, to find different apprenticeships, to help with new trades, right? And we also did a number of food distributions. We could thousands of grocery bags, thousands of grocery store gift cards. We're even doing one today for the horseshoe workers down in Baltimore. And so we want to extend that kind of help and relief and support to the workers out at the airport. And so like Chuck said, we do want to push this HB 1012 bill because that's going to help with their recall rights, union and non-union alike. Also, we have some food distribution drives in the near future for those workers out at the airport. I got to say, as an organizer, I do talk to a lot of these workers, and you can just hear the fear in their voices. And the fear is coming from a lot of the uncertainty, right? It's like, am I going to be able to return to work? Can I tell my landlord? Can I tell my creditors that I'll have a job coming out of this, right? They don't have healthcare because the healthcare was connected to their employment. The unemployment has been problematic for many people, whether it's I can't connect to the Beacon website or they can't get anybody on the phone. It's really been a mess. Sometimes they get an extra bump in unemployment and then sometimes it goes away, right? Like right now they have an extra bump of $300, but that's gonna stop in just a couple of weeks. So folks are really, really uncertain. Even our folks that's back at work in our membership, that group of 150 that I mentioned, only about 20% of those workers are back to work and they're back under reduced hours, right? Now, I will say, during this pandemic, the struggle is real for everybody. And it's just as real for the companies. As you saw in the earlier slides, the foot traffic in the airports are way, way down, like now about 60%. And they don't expect that to come back to normal till about the end of 2023, early 2024, right? So the struggle is real for everybody. But in the case of the companies, the state really stepped up in a big way to help provide relief for them. And they did it in the following ways. So some companies have gotten, well, all companies have gotten extensions. It just depends on the year. Some companies got extensions for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, just so they can recoup the profits that they lost under the pandemic. They also help to reduce the cost of rent for these companies, some larger than others. It just depends on the location at the airport. But this was no small time help. This relief that they provided for the companies is going to cost the state to the tune of $16.8 million, right? So this is big help for these companies, which we love. It's fine. We know our economy got to get back up and running. These companies need help so that they can, get the workers back to work. But what we're saying to the state is, hey, if you provide all of these relief for the companies, can you provide some of these relief for the workers? Are you going to make sure the companies are okay on the other end of this pandemic? Can you do the same for the employees, the folks who service this place, the folks who keep it, up and running, the folks that we see when we come in and out of the airports, the people that's the most vulnerable among us all? So we are definitely trying to push this bill 1020. We also think it's just good public policy for the state to do, right? Let's help all of Maryland get back on its feet. And so we really do have some exciting things coming up in a week to help push this bill. And we would love to have you guys support on this as well. There is some ways that we think if you want to lend your support, that would be the best or the most effective. And if someone can allow me to share my screen, I can go through that, or I can just talk about it.
Other Ty, can you?
Yeah, Bertie, I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
I will do that. Before I do that, do you guys have any questions before I get into the steps that you can support?
No, I think you're clear.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so I'll go through a couple of the steps here. So again, these are ways that will be very, very helpful and instrumental into pushing this House Bill 1012. And so this week on Thursday at 12:30, we do have a press conference, and we would like if we can have like one spokesperson representing all of the parishes to speak for up to 2 minutes at the press conference on Thursday. It's going to be via Zoom. Then the very next day, Friday, it is the House and Committee on Economic Matters hearing, right? And that's also going to be on Zoom, but that's at 1 o'clock. Oh, I don't think I put the time here, but it's at 1 o'clock, and we'd like at least one spokesperson to come and speak for about 3 minutes in support of HB 1012. We also like for the individual parishes to submit a short written testimony to the committee supporting House Bill 1012. And we also have an Action Network link that will enable the members to easily send an email to each member of the committee in support of HB 1012. And we can provide that Action Network link. In fact, it'll be helpful if we can get, if it's possible, a list of the attendees here today, and we can email like a toolbox of all of this stuff and how you can go about submitting your testimony and who can speak. We can email that toolbox for all of you. Thank you so much, even for having me.
Thank you, Bertie. I think, yeah, we have some action steps, and I'm sure by the end of this session, we're going to have a lot of things that we might want to try to do. But thank you, and maybe we can move on to Terry Kavanaugh and see what he's seeing with the people he's been working with.
Yeah, Nancy, I think what maybe the best way to do this, we have two folks who are on the call who are very involved in two campaigns. So I would ask Mary to talk a little bit about the community college campaign that people may not be aware. In Maryland, if the vast majority of people who work at community colleges across Maryland do not have the right to organize, and neither do the faculty part-time or full-time faculty at any of the state public universities and colleges. So we've been working on a campaign for a number of years on that. I was going to ask Mary to take a few minutes to talk about that, and then I would ask Bridge to talk about the campaign that 1199 is leading of the Maryland Essential Workers Protection Act. And then just, if we have any time, I know we're going to run out of time, but I'd also wanted to mention that our local 32BJ also has a bill at the airport called the Secure Maryland Wages Act, if I've got that right. But it basically, if those were federal facilities, the contractors would have to pay, according to the Service Contract Act, at the airport, at Union Station, and at the Port of Baltimore. But because they're not federal installations, they can pay really whatever they can get away with, other than the legal minimums. So that's another bill. We'll put that in the notes about what that bill is and some of the details. So, Mary, if you want to take it about the campaign.
Sure, Terry, thanks. First, I'd like to say to all the brothers and sisters in other unions, I've worked mostly with the AFL and construction workers and folks, and organizing academics has been an entirely new thing. So they're not as much fun, to get riled up at rallies, but I do my best. So I ended up doing a lot of union organizing as a volunteer over the years and working for some unions, but I ended up being a community college faculty member in Baltimore, at Baltimore City Community College, and now at the Community College of Baltimore County. The adjunct faculty who now provide teaching for 70% of the courses in community colleges, 70% of the faculty are part-time. We have no benefits, we have terrible wages. We have no guarantees for callback or anything. And basically we're a semester to semester. We don't even have contracts, SEIU has told us. What they give us is not a legal contract. So in the last 10 years, we've been organizing at both schools. And for 8 years, we've had collective bargaining legislation from SEIU 500, which I have to say, many of the schools approach different unions over the years, and SEIU has been the most helpful, and they've stuck with us through 7 years of our legislation being held back, mainly by Mike Miller of happy blessed memory. But this year we have collective bargaining up. We've already had a House hearing this Thursday, coming Thursday, lots of stuff this week. We have a Senate hearing. One wonderful thing is we're told that we have the votes to get it through both committees and perhaps get signed, even though we expect a veto. So this enables the collective bargaining for other employees, not just the faculty. They started out with adjuncts, now it's other employees who have will have the right to be able to have collective bargaining. So the fact that we haven't had it, as Terry said, has not been well known, but we're hoping that the 8 years, and as I said, a lot of the folks have never been involved in collective bargaining. They don't know what unions are. This has been a really slow process because people are afraid because they can lose their jobs. I mean, you look at someone wrong, you can be without a teaching job. So that fear is big. Most of us union folks know, you got to get going. You're not, if you're afraid, it's not going to work. At least in the US, you don't get shot for doing it like other countries, which I tend to remind people, much to their surprise. So if we have notes going out, I'll be happy to put in the one link, especially for the Senate, that's automatic to Action Network. It sends the petitions to the people who need to see it, including the representatives on that committee for the Senate. So thanks, Terry. And I'm happy to be back sort of in the church ring after sort of leaving it for a while with the adjuncts, but I'm back on with all these great people on the screens here. Thank you.
Okay, before I kick it to Bridge, I just wanted to mention that there's other unions involved in this coalition. AFSCME, which has organized support staff, that's a couple of the colleges. The Maryland State Education Association, which a lot of work that used to be done in high schools are now being done by community colleges. I think that's a matter of following the work, or it's a group of workers that wants to be organized. So all are welcome in the coalition. So Bridge, you want to fill us in on the Essential Workers Act?
Thank you so much, Clayton and Terry, for having me here. And it's really great to see some wonderful faces. Before I get started, I do want to give another shout out and commend the amazing organizers at Unite Here Local 7, particularly Birdie. If you hadn't had a chance to go out to one of their picket lines yet, definitely do so. So just cross union solidarity, gotta share my love with you all. But I'm with 1199 SEIU. We're the largest healthcare workers union in the country. We represent 10,000 frontline healthcare workers in Maryland and DC alone. So our members work mostly in hospitals and in long-term care facilities. Now, as you know, the COVID has hit everyone really hard, and of course that very, very much applies to healthcare workers. We do have some RNs as our members, but the majority are the certified nursing assistants, geriatric nursing assistants, environmental service workers, and other healthcare support staff. So there's a lot that they've been facing. I will start out with talking about the crisis of PPE, just sharing a couple stories with you that I've heard very, very recently. So when all of this started, at first workers in a lot of the hospitals and nursing homes, unless they were on a COVID specific unit, they were not allowed to wear PPE. They were told they could not, even if they brought their own cloth masks, they were not allowed to wear PPE unless they were on a COVID floor, which is absolutely ridiculous because we know COVID does not stay on COVID floors. It is everywhere. These are workers who are bathing patients, preparing their food, cleaning their rooms, and interacting very, very closely with people for long periods of time. So thankfully, the union 1199 was able to step in, and we fought really, really hard to make sure our workers would even be allowed to use PPE. So thankfully now they are allowed and required to wear PPE, but that took a massive fight on our end to even get that to be a possibility. But now that they are allowed to get PPE, many of them are not being provided the PPE they need. They're still coming in with, cloth masks, which are okay for folks if you're, going into the store real quick and coming back out, but we need our healthcare professionals to have medical grade PPE. Often when they are provided medical grade PPE, it's not enough. I heard a story from a worker the other day who had to reuse her N95 mask for 1 month before they would replace it for her. Now, disposable masks, as you all know, are not supposed to be reused. They lose their effectiveness over time. So it's absolutely horrifying to hear that workers are being forced to reuse their masks until they're just not effective at all. There have been healthcare workers showing up to work in garbage bags that they had to cut a little hole to stick their head through because they weren't receiving gowns. I heard another very disturbing story from a worker the other day who said her gown, she'd been wearing it for weeks. It was completely shredded, covered in holes, obviously not sanitary. She went to the management and she asked for a new gown. And all the guy said was, He just looked at her, said, looked away, started typing back on his computer, just did not even acknowledge her other than that sound, which is so infuriating and disrespectful. That same worker also told me that whenever they do have PPE, they don't have PPE that fits people. She described herself and her coworkers walking around the facility looking like the Incredible Hulk because the PPE they were given was just way too small and they didn't get enough sizes that reflected what everybody needed. So even when they are provided PPE, it's definitely not up to par and where it needs to be. Moving on to paid leave. Thankfully, a lot of union members do have some paid sick days, but of course, being in a pandemic, we need to make sure that those are able to be used and that there's specific paid quarantine leave for workers who get exposed to COVID. So right now, when folks get sick, a lot of them are having to use their vacation days if they have any. You have a few sick days a year. COVID is a type of illness that can stick around for the long run. So they may, burn through their sick days pretty quickly, be forced to use their vacation days that they've earned for rest and relaxation. Vacation days should not be used for sick days. And then when they burn through all of that, a lot of them are forced to apply for workers' compensation. for being able to take more time off of work. But that is extremely challenging if anyone has tried to apply for workers' comp lately, just because they're flooded with requests and hearing a lot of things like, well, you can't actually prove that you got it at work, so we're not going to give you workers' comp. But like, where else do you think hospital workers are getting COVID? That's ridiculous. So definitely need to make sure we're fighting for leave so that people can quarantine safely. One example I have for this being really important is a worker recently got the vaccine and he ended up having side effects from the vaccine and needed to take time off of work. Now he'd already maxed out the amount of time that he could possibly take, and did have some issues with tardiness. Now that's due to transportation issues, which are also a systemic issue. But instead of allowing him to take his days that he needed, even if they were unpaid, they simply fired him. And now there's a lot of workers at this facility who are scared to get vaccinated, not necessarily because of the side effects themselves, but because they know they cannot afford to lose their jobs if they get sick. So again, quarantine leave, sick leave specifically for COVID is absolutely necessary. Another issue is the vast majority of our members still are not receiving hazard pay for the extra risk that they are taking on at work. I've heard stories from workers who live with children and they haven't even told their children that there's outbreaks in their facility because it's so mentally damaging and terrifying for the children to be so anxious about their parents. Workers will come home and they'll literally get undressed out of their scrubs, all the way down to almost nothing outside. So before they go into their homes, they can at least not have their work clothes on them. So that's just, I know, really powerful imagery. Worker told me that she wakes up, kisses her husband and her kids every day and walks out the door not knowing if today is the day she's going to bring the virus home and infect her family. So that's also very mentally and emotionally traumatizing for the workers as well. Right now, there's a massive outbreak in Baltimore City of the B117 strain of COVID, which is 35 to 45% more contagious than the original COVID-19. So again, they're still not getting that hazard pay, and the risk is just increasing and increasing. But aside from the risk, everyone's expenses are going up. Usually children would be in school. That's a place for them where they're able to get fed a couple meals a day. But now that they're working from home, the cost of food is increasing like exponentially, and the cost of childcare is increasing. Normally, if you've got a kid at school, you don't have to hire a babysitter to make sure that they're taken care of during the day. And there are also a lot of workers who formerly had taken public transportation who are now taking Uber and Lyft to get to work, which is, again, far, far more expensive. So we've seen these wages stay the exact same while the risk and while the expenses are skyrocketing. So, and then finally, there's another issue about, workers being forced to work in dangerous conditions. One story that I heard was there was a boss at a facility who was actually calling workers who had COVID and demanding that they come back into work before their sick leave was over because they're short-staffed. So they actually brought this one worker back who was still sick, and the doctor that she saw sent her home and was like, "You should not be here. You should have never been called back into work." So that's creating a very, very dangerous situation, bringing people into these facilities knowing that they have COVID and they could potentially expose their workers. So the right to refuse dangerous work is incredibly important. It's dangerous for someone to work while they're sick, so they should have the opportunity to say no to that. It's also dangerous for coworkers to work alongside someone who is sick, especially when they're not getting the PPE that they need. So all of these issues are really leading to, a lot of problems, but short staffing, because a lot of healthcare workers are simply quitting. I talked to a worker who was like, "You know what? I have been in healthcare for 20 years. It's my passion. I love taking care of my patients, and I can't do this anymore." So now she's working at an Amazon warehouse. What world are we in she feels safer working in an Amazon warehouse than in a healthcare facility? Lastly, there's been some sneaky tricks by management in some facilities that have combinations of union workers and non-union workers. So they're spreading out union workers. You know, typically they would work at one facility, but now they're getting scheduled at another facility. And to deal with that, they're bringing in non-union temp workers. Now these non-union workers do not have a union to fight for them to get the PPE and the pay that they need. So even though we are able to advocate for our members to get PPE, if not every single worker has equal access to that, everyone's in danger. And this is really just a way to try to erode the power of the union. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you because there's a lot of things our members are experiencing, but the good news is we can help pass a really important piece of legislation that is going to help address a lot of these issues. I would love to show you all our fact sheet if the Coast could just quickly give me screen sharing capabilities. Awesome, thank you so much. So we kind of went through and we talked about, you know, all of these different issues, but this is what the bill would do. It would establish the right to safe and hygienic working conditions, which of course includes making sure that there's enough high quality medical grade PPE to make sure that workers are able to stay safe on the job. Next is hazard pay and healthcare assistance. So we talked about hazard pay. The healthcare assistance piece would make it easier for folks to get health insurance, expanding the Maryland Health Exchange. So that way it's just easier and hopefully more affordable to sign up. And the hazard pay that we're fighting for is $3 an hour. This bill would also require essential employers to have emergency action plans in place. Part of the reason that things were so bad in the beginning is no one had a plan for how to deal with something like this. So these they'll have to have plans for how they're going to get people vaccinated, how they're going to distribute PPE. So that way, if there is another spike in COVID or even a future pandemic, which unfortunately we can't expect due to climate change and lots of other problems that we're seeing. So at least this way, we're not having to scramble and be, you know, you can be more proactive. Then the universal health and bereavement leave. I alluded to the quarantine leave that would give folks time off of work, paid sick days to deal with COVID. It would also establish bereavement leave in case a close family member does end up passing away. And I believe that's 3 days of bereavement leave. The right to refuse dangerous work. I'm particularly excited about this one. So, you know, that worker who went to her management and asked for a new gown because hers was totally covered in holes. And he just said, that worker could have said, okay, I'm not working until you get me my new gown. And she would not be able to be retaliated against or fired for demanding her right to PPE. And finally, making sure we have free testing and better reporting of positive results. The reporting will really help us determine which essential workers are getting sick and where they're getting sick. And for a lot of folks right now, testing is free, but there's nothing codifying into law that it has to be. So if workers are required to get tested, especially if they're required to get tested regularly, as our workers are, that money should not be coming out of their own pockets, especially because they're not receiving hazard pay. So that is what the bill does. And what you can do to help today is, I'm going to put a link in the chat. We are emailing key legislators to get them to support this bill. Now, I will let you all know there's a lot of very greedy pro-corporate interests out there that are flooding legislators with opposition and lies about this bill, you know, talking about how businesses are the most important thing and we just absolutely have to preserve businesses while workers are dying. Businesses have been getting millions of dollars in relief funding, but there was nothing that required any of that funding to go towards protecting the essential workers who make those businesses run. So I did put this email, click to email campaign. You can write whatever you want, or you can send the pre-scripted message, but it's really important that we're absolutely flooding our legislators with these emails and with calls as well. So they remember who they're really working for. They're not working for business owners, they're working for the people. So we need to remind them of that. So I'll ask everyone on this call to please, please, please push this click to email out to all of your networks. If you can, pick up the phone, call Derek Davis, the chair of the Economic Matters Committee. He is also the bill sponsor. So it's, good that he's supporting it, but we need it to be a strong bill. There's going to be a big fight around the paid sick leave, around the hazard pay, and around the right to refuse dangerous work. Now, if you know any essential workers who are willing to share their stories, please connect them with me, because we're working to set up meetings, lobbying meetings with essential workers and key legislators so they can say, well, I was going to say face to face, but Zoom to Zoom, let them know more about these issues and these stories that I have told you all today, so that our legislators can really understand we're talking about, getting over the first wave of COVID and the second wave and the third wave. Our members never got over the first wave. Like, we're very much still in it, still fighting for the things that we've been fighting for almost a year at this point. So thank you all so much for standing with healthcare workers and all essential workers. So this bill would apply to more than just healthcare. It's effective for anyone who is required to report to work in person. There's no work from home option, and they're deemed as an essential business. So it includes, grocery store workers and transportation workers and a lot of state employees, and the list goes on and on. So Protect Maryland Workers Coalition, I believe has over 70 coalition partners at this point. So you'll really see the wide impact for who will be benefiting from this bill. So please, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. If you know a worker willing to share their story for a social media campaign, or speaking with press, or talking to their legislators directly, please send them my way. And I am trying to type and talk at the same time, so that's not going to work.
Thank you. Thank you, Bridget. So we're hearing a lot about, what is happening and the problems that people have been experiencing, especially during this pandemic. But so why should we care? Father Ty, you want to give us some inspiration about caring about all of this?
Sure. I'm getting a little bit of, let me try. Can y'all hear me well without an echo now? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be very brief, because this has been excellent. I want to thank everyone that's spoken so far, because you really, you've given us all the reasons why we care and why we need to care about this as committed people of faith, and for us as from the Catholic community as well. This just sits with our Catholic social teaching tradition, which is, this is at the level of, when people want to say this is not just doctrine, it's dogma. This is at the highest teaching level of our church, that workers have a right to organize and collectively bargain for their rights in the workplace. So the right to form a union and the rights that unions bring are something that the church has steadfastly supported, at least since the Industrial Revolution. And the first, what we regard as sort of the first social encyclical letter of a pope, was Pope Leo XIII back in maybe 1891-ish or something like this, when he issued the encyclical letter Rerum Novarum in our time. Or no, I think that's maybe the English title. Not quite exactly translating the Latin perfectly, but and so the rights for workers to form unions, solidarity is a Catholic social teaching principle that is certainly at rest here, and the dignity of the human person. I think what we heard, and I know Bertie and Bridge both spoke, and Mary too, y'all from different workplaces, but something that's very common is like the dignity of workers, whether you're an adjunct faculty member, a hotel or airport worker, or a healthcare worker, or a worker in any industry, quite honestly. And I know that there's some people like Matthew and Bill, you're seeing this also too across where you're at with workers. In any place, that oftentimes the workplace is where our human dignity is assaulted the most in some ways by just the way corporations and other interests really can try to impose their will for profit, and what that does for workers and working families. I know we see here in Baltimore a lot of connections that were being made in what we just heard today, that healthcare, lack of affordable daycare, for instance, lack of access to food, lack of access to, in a COVID time, a pandemic, to personal protective equipment, to the right to not have to work in an unsafe, hygienic workplace where people might be getting sick. And we've seen in Maryland, unfortunately, if we had someone on the call from AFSCME, they could tell you that they have had 10 members die of COVID since March that they know of. There might be more, but they know of at least 10 workers who have died because of contracting COVID in the workplace. So human dignity is what this is about, and promotion and upholding and protecting and strengthening human dignity. And participation. I mean, these fundamental Catholic social teaching principles have really been part of just the modern church teaching. It's part of moral theology. It's part of, as a good priest friend of mine, Father Cleet Kiley from Chicago reminded me too at times, it's not just teaching. This is doctrine. This is dogma. This isn't like church pronouncement at just the highest level as some other very important church teachings. And yet so often we do know, while we might be working for these principles to be put into practice where we're at and everywhere we're at, we have a long way to go as the church, active and alive, even in Baltimore, let alone universally across the world. Thankfully, Pope Francis, time and time again, brings up the issues of workers. He obviously hears very keenly about what's going on in the workplace, because it doesn't matter what writing you pick up of his, and whether it's his, like a very recent book or the very recent encyclical letter that he wrote about fraternity and sort of commonality and coming out of this time of COVID, to maybe his first real pastoral letter, which was Joy of the Gospel. The conditions affecting workers and families across the world come first and foremost. And so while it's not good news to hear often, we have to hear it. So we have to hear what workers are experiencing. We also have to make sure that workers are a part of the work that we are doing. So it's not just in isolation, that our organizations, like even us, a small group, can be made up of not just clergy and church workers and ministers, but also include people in these various working places, include so many of you who are helping organize in the workplace for the rights of workers. Yeah, so I mean, I just leave it there. Our church teaching is very crystal clear. Pope Francis keeps highlighting this. He's used a number of frameworks to talk about it. I think most recently, and this stretches from the time before the pandemic, but he keeps highlighting even in pandemic times, that this isn't just also, by the way, about our need to be with workers, especially workers that are organizing workplaces, workers that have organized their workplaces but continue to have to fight those battles. I can think joining with Unite Here, like just for the Baltimore Marriott Waterfront, for example, right? It was a great thing about a year and a half ago in a May day, a wonderful, beautiful day in May, when the workers voted for their union. The workers at that hotel voted to, yes, we want a union. And it's taken, what, Bertie, until just this past Thursday to get that first contract. So it's taken almost 2 years, well over a year and a half of negotiating. And the need of the contract even more important, I mean, during these pandemic times. And that's true of probably every campaign. You guys in labor that have been involved in this for years, this isn't just over, that this is almost like a constant struggle. Even, I mean, I remember them saying, even when you have the contract, now it's going to be working to make sure the contract is being followed by the company, making sure that workers are able to pursue and get their rights that the contract is now establishing. So, and then, you know, you have to worry about the next contract. So in time, but I want to thank you all for being here today. This is so much a part of our faith. And our faith tradition, and there's some beauty to it in the sense that it really is about us going out as church to be with people in the working world with the conditions as is. It's also good. I'm glad that others have joined us too, Bill and Matthew. I know you're doing some work, maybe in some different spaces as well, where there's not necessarily an organized union presence. The workers that are maybe perhaps not even there, able to be there yet, but are working towards maybe something like that in the future. And really working with the people that are the most vulnerable and the poorest among us, and that's also important too. So just wanted to thank you. I guess I can turn this over to Clayton, who might talk about what's going on and what Church Labor Partnership, how they're developing, but also maybe what we can do here locally.
Thank you, Father Ty. As Father Ty mentioned, I'm Clayton Sinyai. I'm the Executive Director of the Catholic Labor Network. We are a 25-year-old organization formed back in the 1990s when a group of priests and a group of clergy, religious, and lay social justice advocates came together, inspired by that doctrine that Father Ty was talking about, in order to promote Catholic social teaching on labor and work and to extend solidarity to workers around the country. And most recently, we have been awarded a grant from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The Catholic Campaign for Human Development, their anti-poverty program, provided a grant for something we call the Church Labor Partnership Project. And the Church Labor Partnership Project, it enables this grant, and this Church Labor Partnership Project is about working with activists like yourselves, unions, bringing unions and church organizations, whether parishes or Catholic Charities agencies or what have you, together to promote the good news of Catholic social teaching. Our activities work on 3 different levels. On the one hand, there is advocacy, the first level, which you've heard a lot here about here today. That happens to be, I think, a focus because the Maryland legislature happens to be in session. So this time of year, we often are focused on advocating for worker rights before the state legislatures. And at the federal level, we work on things like promoting an increase in the minimum wage, the fight for 15. On another level, we do solidarity with workers who are trying to organize or who are trying to bargain a fair contract with living wages and safe working conditions. And we wound up working a good deal with the Hotel Workers Union Unite Here earlier this year when workers were laid off to make sure that their health care that their employers extended their health care even when they were laid off, to make sure they didn't lose their health coverage along with their jobs. We also work to connect low-income workers with opportunities in the union side of the economy. In some places like Nashville, Tennessee, we work with the construction unions to go out to local parishes, and when the union apprenticeship programs are opening up, we get out there to people in the pews and make sure they're offered an opportunity to come in and apply for those jobs. So we work on 3 different levels. These kinds of activities go on all over the country, but I have to say that among the places I've looked, the activities that Nancy and Father Ty have coordinated in Baltimore are a real inspiration and something we try to spread in other areas. But I'm looking forward, but I understand they're looking to step up their activity even here. And so I will return the baton to Nancy for that.
Thank you. And wow, this has been a lot of information. Hopefully, we can start to think among ourselves. We have been, doing this once a year at a social ministry convocation, and in the past year, we've been, putting together a network of people who want to know what's happening and what we can do to help. But maybe we need to think a little bit more about how we can get engaged and have a solid voice in our archdiocese in support of working people. Pope Francis said that as we come out of this economy, it's not going to be enough to put a little bit of varnish on things or patch up with some paint. We have to think in terms of really rebuilding the economy and the work life so that everyone can share in its benefits and we can all live in dignity. So I think we have a big job ahead of us. And my question is, what ideas do you all have as to how we can be effective as a church group, a voice? So I'm anxious to hear what you all think.
So on that, sorry about that. Ward has put in the chat expressing a need for an archdiocese-wide labor school. So Ward, I don't know if you wanted to share more about what you're thinking. I mean, there's an idea.
Wow.
Yeah, years ago, I did a radio show for my union, AFGE, and I had John Sweeney on, and he was talking a lot about the old labor school that they had up in Boston. And I mean, this goes way back in church history, but the church has a tradition of basically educating workers about unions and their rights and things like that. And they still do it through it's the Boston Guild, I think they call it, through the archdiocese up there. But we could replicate things like that, where it's not just teaching people how to get involved in unions, but it's also teaching them how to do collective bargaining, how to be, how to handle grievances and things like that, some of the soft skills stuff. And it just kind of helps people within our faith learn what a union really is, because I think it's like something that people don't understand unless they're really in it or their families in it. So we really need to do some outreach and also put that into maybe the Catholic schools, so kids get some labor history, and maybe even in the Catholic universities. I mean, Loyola, I think, has a little bit of stuff, but I mean, we could really expand that.
Good thought, because this is one of the things that we do not hear much about, I don't think, in our churches. The whole mission for equity for workers. And the Loyola and some of the Jesuit schools years ago had programs where they brought people together, the general population and labor, to promote the doctrine. But I think a lot of that is gone. Any other thoughts of what we can do? Terry, it looks like you're on the verge of saying something. And you're mute.
I just sent something into the chat, but I think it would be good for us to just maybe we have this and I'm just not aware of it, but if we had someone who at the Archdiocese had two functions, one would be our contact, our meaning the Catholic Labor Network, that who we could go to and advocate for and try to move in different things. The other thing, if that person, I don't know if there is anyone in the Archdiocese who is responsible for encouraging, requiring, helping formulate, organize justice and peace committees in each parish. I believe that in each parish there are people who would respond, and and that could become our contact in each of the parishes, because what seems to happen is we have there's a handful of parishes. Father Ty probably and other people on the call or meeting know this a lot better than I do, but it seems to center around a handful of parishes that get involved. And I think that's because that's either we have very good organizers in that parish, we have pastors who, if they don't green light something, at least they don't red light it. But maybe in a lot of the suburban parishes, fair amount with probably significant union membership, they probably are left, probably totally unaware of some of the work that we're doing. So if we had someone from the Archdiocese who had those two responsibilities, I think that would help us really give us the opportunity to build.
Terry, I think that just want to point out that the last time they had a social justice group was right before Cardinal Keeler came, and I was involved in the layoffs at the Catholic Center. They closed that office, and as far as I know, no one has gotten anywhere trying to get that back. And in fact, I think this group may be the closest to what we call an archdiocesan thing. But I think that's been an ongoing problem for the social justice folks, not just labor, everybody. And these panels, I think, are going to have include a lot of other parishioners who have the same concerns, and not always sharing the same concerns, but let's say pretty much on labor, there's a good record for the church. But I think that's been going on for years. And this is the time of fundraising for the Archdiocese. I would suggest, because I plan on doing is writing a letter saying, for years you're asking folks to give money, but it's really not going to some of the better places. And we don't have any say in where the money goes, another issue. And just to mention Loyola, because I know Clayton is aware of one of the battles that we've had. They have a business school, and that's really not good for Catholic universities, because Loyola has been very anti-labor, mainly because of Selinger Business School. So that's what we're faced with. But I'm not trying to, I think your idea is great. It's just, there are a lot of folks, not just us, really begging for this. So that's just my final word on that.
I'm beginning to wonder if we maybe need to have some sort of put ourselves together with some structure, because I think one of the things we have to do is advocate with the archdiocese so that they recognize in the archdiocese that this is important. And it is something that people in the parishes should know about. And so far, it doesn't seem like we get much traction in trying to reach out as church people. So maybe groups like what we have right here, and some of the others who've been following us in the last year, maybe we just need to get ourselves organized a little bit so that we can make our voices stronger. Any other thoughts? Maureen sitting, oh, okay, Matt, he's ready.
So let me try to, okay, can you hear me without echo now? Okay. I first want to say, my father's family actually are traditionally hail from St. Dominic's, from Father Ty's parish, and come from a legacy of Catholic Union laborers. The United Covenant Union is actually doing most of its work with African American clergy, not exclusively, but I'd say that's the majority, many of whom themselves are low-wage workers. Of course, mostly Protestant. And so my first remark is just to applaud everyone here. I have never attended any Protestant denominational discussion on work and on labor, and I'm just very, very much impressed with this discussion. And I think the only thing I would say is that, however the UCU, I know I speak for Maureen and Bill in saying this, that however we can be helpful and resourceful in the affairs that were discussed today, we very much would want to be. Also, a shout out to my friend, my good friend Bridge, who I feel is always one email ahead of me, and I just want to thank her for the work she's doing.
And Maureen, you look like you were about ready to.
Well, yes, I'm struck by how, okay, so here we are, labor people, we're saying, oh, we need a social justice person in every parish. I'm on the Black Lives Matter Interfaith Council. We also are saying that my parish racial justice group also has been calling for this. Beyond the Boundaries, which is related with housing, we've also been calling for this. So I go to a lot of meetings and I'm suddenly hearing this, but not suddenly. Over the years, we have heard this and sort of wrung our hands about it. But I think, so I guess as a small group, we need to do some serious organizing, strategizing work about this. Is what I'm feeling. It's like, oh, okay, when I worked for Beyond the Boundaries, which is now about 10 years ago, I was the last remaining social justice paid person in the Archdiocese, and I was only half-time for 2 years, and then I was terminated. They just defunded the position. So that was the end of even anything, now we have ethnic offices, but we don't have anybody who's, so that is something that I guess what I'm hearing is maybe we really need to strategize about a campaign and accept, this is a 3-year campaign, you know, I mean, make a timeline. Who are the target people? What are the meetings we have to have? All the usual things. That's what I'm sitting here thinking, because I'm just, I mean, so that's, but of course that just tinkers with the structure of the archdiocese. It would be helpful because it would be an ongoing network and communication, and that will spin off many other things. So yeah, it's just, I think we want to bring the word of labor to the people. We want to bring it out to, we want the workers to know that the church is with them. We want the church to realize it's their obligation to stand with workers. And how do we communicate those?